Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. My name is Fred Varco, a member of the Professional Activities Committee here. Before we start, can I ask you to turn off your phones or set them to silent?
Good point.
Today's press conference covers Trump's re-emergence and Russia's destabilization of the US, consequences for policies toward Japan and Asia. And very happy to welcome back Glenn Carle, who's going to bring us up to date on what a potential second term could hold for the region, where China and North Korea are increasingly belligerent. Glenn served 23 years on the what might be called the dark side of the Central Intelligence Agency, and his territory has included terrorism, international organized crime, and narcotics. He's currently an associate fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School Carre Center for Human Rights Policy. I'll be interested to know his opinion of Donald Trump. Of course, I'm neutral, but I've just finished reading Michael Wolff's book on the first 9 months of the Trump administration, and found out that Trump's national security advisor called him a dope. His director of economic counsel said he was dumb as shit. Steve Mnuchin, Secretary of the Treasury and the White House Chief of Staff, called him an idiot. And Secretary of State, his representative around the world, called Trump a fucking moron. So over to you, Glenn. Fill us in with the rest of the story.
Okay, and I there conclude my remarks. I think I was surprised that this audience, which I think would be the most cynical of all possible ones, actually applauded 3 or 4 claps for a CIA officer, but I'm heartened and I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So, my background, of course, is in international relations and foreign affairs, and that's not exclusively, but primarily what I've come to write about for Newsweek, and with an understandable focus more on Asian things. However, I am, I suppose, once an intelligence officer, always one, and so I became alarmed in 2015. Just as a citizen, I had retired from the CIA, and I live in the Boston region, where I grew up. Just watching current affairs and the presidential campaign, and Donald Trump, of course, as he was conducting his campaign. And like everyone else, I had known about Trump as a public figure for decades prior to that. I actually had one near interaction with Donald Trump, which perhaps is illustrative of our relative places in the universe. I was living in Manhattan at the time, and I went to a polo match on Long Island, and my children at the time were 4 and 2, perhaps. And at the intermission, at the halftime, I'm not a polo aficionado at all. It is traditional for the children to go out onto the pitch and tamp down all of the grass that has been churned up by the horses. And so my 2-year-old daughter was paddling about, having fun doing that. And of course, she needed to have her diaper changed. And so I, as a good father, was prepared. And I kneeled down, surrounded by the horse manure and the divots, and was changing my daughter's diaper. And Donald Trump strolled by, not any further away than this, with, I think it was not his current wife, but the then most beautiful woman that modern science can build. And he sort of strode past, looking to be, adored by whoever would look at him. And I thought then, well, here's a comment on my station in life, that I'm kneeling surrounded by manure, and he has some version of Miss Universe as he walks past. But of course, that also is a comment that I was doing something natural and admirable, and he was preening. That's my one interaction with Donald Trump. So in 2015, it just jumped out at me, and I won't go into depth about this because this is sort of an earlier tale, although relevant. It jumped out at me what his vulnerabilities are, and my job as an intelligence officer was, as George Tenet used to put it, to recruit spies and steal secrets. That's what the CIA and intelligence service does, or do. And to do so, you have to look for the vulnerabilities of your targets, which is our term of art of the people. I'm involved in human intelligence. And the vulnerabilities of Donald Trump, the exploitable characteristics, desires, impulses of the man were so grotesquely apparent that I thought any Russian intelligence officer who does not target this man should be fired for gross incompetence. And the Russians are not incompetent. They're a very good intelligence service. So I became alarmed, and I thought, holy smoke, this is just shocking. And I can't let that pass by unremarked upon. It's my duty, actually, to comment on this publicly so people will be aware, at least the vulnerabilities. So I drafted an article in which I pretended to be the head of the Russian intelligence service in the United States, assessing Donald Trump's vulnerabilities and hypothetically sending this back to Moscow and saying, here's how I recommend that we approach this vulnerable target. And all of the things we can achieve as Russian intelligence service with this man. And I thought, God, that's sort of controversial, and I'll be denounced just as a biased person. So I sent it to someone in your universe who is a colleague, someone I knew, whom I won't name, who's relatively well known, saying, "What do you think of this? Do I dare submit this for publication?" I had not spoken to this person for several years at that point. Literally the next morning, I received a call from him saying, "Glenn, I think you're on to more than you may be aware of. Let me tell you what I am hearing." And now part of his job was he's sort of a circuit rider. He goes to various countries and to do his job. And he said, "I have heard from associates or contacts of mine I might get this a little off in my recollection because it's now a decade ago, but fundamentally this is it." He said, "Contacts of mine in the French intelligence service, British intelligence service, Dutch intelligence service, I think Lithuanian intelligence service, and German intelligence service, respectively, have all said to me that they are aware of contacts of known or suspect members of the Russian intelligence service or co-optees or associates thereof with either Donald Trump, members of his family, or members of his entourage." And so you seem to be onto something, Glenn, in your hypothetical article. And I went, oh my God. So I thought, well, that's pretty alarming. And so then I tried to contact former colleagues of mine, ambassadors and people on oversight committees and so on, and in the service. And those who had retired as I could respond. And I wasn't surprised at what happened. Those who were no longer in the government said, "Gee, this is alarming. I agree." And those who were still serving couldn't say anything to me and didn't really respond. So that's how I came to be focused on all of this and issue of Trump and Russia. And I think since then, we can easily cite literally something like 420 documented public domain instances of known contacts of members of the Russian intelligence service or co-optees or people known to be associated with them with, as I said, either Trump, members of his family, or members of his entourage. I could go on and on and on. That's sort of yesterday's news, tragically. it shouldn't be yesterday's news, but it now is. The Russian hoax is not a hoax. It's pretty real. So that brings me to now and how I came to focus on this. So I subsequently learned, and I think all of you probably will know better than most anyone, given your professions, that not only there are two aspects to what the Russians have been doing, and this is classic intelligence work, but it's well substantiated now what the Russians have been doing. In 1979, the then head of the KGB apparently felt that the KGB was not doing very well in recruiting human sources in the United States. And so he issued an order, ramp up your efforts and get me some scalps, which is the term used in the CIA. Recruit some Americans. In 1980, the first documented contact of someone associated with Russian intelligence and with Donald Trump occurred. It's a long, convoluted tale. It's not at all likely that they said, okay, we will make this man, we've identified this man, we're now going to make him president. But you play the cards that you have and you exploit them as much as you can. And over the years, he served as an unwitting access agent for people of interest, as an opportune way to funnel and launder huge amounts of money. He doesn't have to have been a recruited asset to have served the purposes, all of these purposes, and that's probably the case. And since he's uncontrollable, were I the intelligence officer targeting him, I would not try to control him or formally recruit him. I would just try to manipulate him, and the Russians do that better than just about anybody. So that's one aspect of what happened starting from 1979, an intense effort to increase the number of human sources. The second aspect was that, we'll jump ahead to about 2011, President Putin had, he's now under, the individual I'm referring to is now under house arrest apparently, unsurprisingly, but he had a vice minister or an advisor named Vladislav Surkov. He's one of the significant figures of the first quarter of the 21st century, not particularly well known in the West. And he developed a shockingly Orwellian and more effective than Orwell could have known, because technology has changed, approach to governing and to shaping the perceptions of the Russian public, the heart of which is to use modern media in such a way that you destroy the possibility of identifying objective facts and truth. And if you can't identify what is true, anything can be and nothing is. And so the government is freed to say essentially whatever it wants and to deny whatever it doesn't like. It was dramatically successful. Now, intelligence services and governments, but especially intelligence services, have always attempted to manipulate perceptions in covert action campaigns. But the ability for intelligence services to do this is exponentially greater in the last decades, in particular since I've left my profession with the development of AI. And Surkov and Putin were wildly successful taking Orwell's depiction and making it real and more powerfully successful than even Orwell thought. In 2011, however, we were, all of Central Eastern Europe and Russia were experiencing the color revolutions. And Ukraine was slipping out of the Russian imperial orbit and was starting to turn to the West politically, economically, and culturally. And the color revolutions seemed to start affecting Russia itself. And in the election of 2011, which Putin was reelected, Putin became convinced, I'm sure sincerely convinced, that for him, Hillary Clinton, but more broadly the United States and the U.S. intelligence services were seeking to overthrow him through a covert action campaign. That's baloney. Now, I wasn't working the service. Even if I were involved in something that the U.S. was doing, of course I could not say so, but that's not how the U.S. The CIA functions. That's so fraught a project to try to overthrow Russia, the Russian government, that it's just inconceivable, because the fear of unintended consequences properly would be so great that it just is not possible. What did happen was that the United States and the EU and other non-Russian entities sent electoral observers to watch the process of the election, to try to evaluate to what extent the election was, and to foster that the election be a free and fair vote, in which Putin may well have lost, but he didn't. And Putin interpreted that as unacceptable interference in domestic affairs. You know, authoritarians like Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin and so on don't like this. This is interfering in domestic affairs rather than trying to establish what we in the West view as universal principles of fair democratic governance. And so he became hugely angry and resentful and said, I will do to America what Hillary tried to do to me. And he apparently has consciously ordered, since about that time, what we have all read about and argued about in the 2016 election, which was a tremendously aggressive campaign to affect American public attitudes in the election. And they've continued their human development. You can tick off all sorts of known instances where the Russian intelligence operatives have literally been in bed with, it's a classic thing to do, Republican operatives, financing the National Rifle Association, financing the campaigns of people who are isolationists, which is what the British did, by the way, in reverse in 1939 and 40, to undermine isolationists to try to save England by promoting internationalists, but that's another tale from a different era. Not only in this covert action campaign did they seek to support those who would be isolationist, those who would be unfavorably inclined to opposing or taking strong measures against Russia or in support of NATO and so on, but also to foment discord in the United States. The objectives being to detach the United States from NATO and from Europe, to make the United States less hostile to Russia, to increase the influence of the isolationist sentiment in the United States, and more fundamentally even, to turn Americans against themselves, Northeastern liberals against the Southern apologists for the Confederacy, gun rights advocates against gun control advocates, one race against another. It didn't matter who they supported. The Russian intelligence service actively supported everything and its opposite so as to create discord. And they've been phenomenally successful, as we have seen. I'm not blaming the Russian intelligence service and Vladimir Putin for all of America's woes. Any good intelligence operation, whether it's against a specific individual or a vast covert action campaign trying to affect a population, has to, if it's good, it will be incompetent if it doesn't, has to build upon truth and existing mores, beliefs, and assumptions. If you don't do that, then you're just trying to make something out of whole cloth. You take the truth and you slightly twist it, and then you can succeed. the Russians have succeeded, I think, in the greatest intelligence operation in history. And it's not that they had a specific playbook, but they had a strategic direction in which they have sought to go, and I think have dramatically succeeded. Now, Trump might not. So thus, Trump, by every objective measure, any previous American politician really would fade away. Americans don't like those who have lost the presidential election. You normally turn the page and look to somebody else. But in this instance, he's back. Now, something I'm certain the Russians had no conception would occur we now have slipped into evolved into a situation where he has become a cult figure. It's not a rational phenomenon anymore, and it doesn't matter what he says or does. 30% of the population thinks that criticism of him is an expression of condescension towards who they are, and they will support him no matter what he says or does. He's for abortion, great. He's against abortion, great. He wants to invade Mexico, doesn't matter. He wants to build a fence, a wall, fine. He wants all America to speak Spanish. It really doesn't matter. 35% will support him invariably. It's a social, psychological phenomenon now. So what does that imply for Japan and for Asia? Why is that relevant here? Well, obviously America remains the 800-pound gorilla, or the first among equals, even now. It's no longer the unipolar moment. We've become, if not a multipolar, a disjointed, confused international environment, and progressively that will be the case. But it does have huge implications, what's happened for Japan. And even, well, if Trump, can Japan, let's say, rely on the United States? If President Biden wins re-election, the answer is absolutely yes. Pardon me. He's the most internationalist and most experienced president since at least Bush the father, and possibly since Eisenhower, and doesn't receive credit or condemnation, even if one opposes it. I support these views. He doesn't receive adequate credit for that because he's perceived as being old and a tired politician by many, even my children, who are educated and I think focused on and enlightened. I'm biased, of course, about political, social issues. Share the standard view that, well, but he's old. And, well, is that relevant if he's compos mentis as he is? So if Biden wins, yes. But if Trump wins, Trump does have perhaps one conviction beyond a desire to seek praise for himself and to be the center of attention. And he is an isolationist. And as I'm sure all of you know, in 1940, the Conscription Act that President Roosevelt put forward only passed by one vote. And it took Pearl Harbor to make it possible for the United States to enter the war. Those attitudes have not gone away at all. And I think you can make a strong case that the 75-year period of American internationalism is actually across the grain of American cultural inclinations. At the least, one can say that half the country consistently doesn't want to have anything to do with the rest of the world and is isolationist. That Trump does share that view. Trump also embodies, as we've all seen, another deep current in American political culture, which is not discussed very often, and that is a strong authoritarian temptation. I think all humans are hierarchical by nature. We, just as other mammals have pecking orders in the pack, so too do humans. Democracy requires reason and self-abnegation, which is probably not natural by our natures. I'm happy that we have exercised reason to succeed in it, but half the country forever has supported the likes of Huey Long and Father Coughlin and George Wallace. All of these are authoritarian figures. You may not know, or perhaps you do, that, it's not ancient history, but since it's only a decade before I was born, that just up to the point where the United States entered World War II, in the United States, there were large numbers of summer camps for youths that were Nazi. There were Nazi youth camps that were filled on Long Island and in Rhode Island and Massachusetts and everywhere in the liberal parts of the country. Madison Square Garden was sold out by the American Nazi Party in 1940. This didn't disappear after Pearl Harbor, and it has not disappeared today. I'm not saying Americans are Nazis or want to walk around with their arms up like this, but there is a strong authoritarian streak. Alexis de Tocqueville, my hero, he should be all of your heroes, the most insightful thinker of the 19th century, certainly the most insightful analyst of American democracy and American culture, noted in 1835 when he published his book, Democracy in America, about the strong authoritarian populist impulses in American society that are intrinsic to a democracy, frankly, that will be susceptible to emotional appeals and whims, and that democracy contains the seeds of its own destruction. It's just a long philosophical debate. I'll try to avoid returning us to my college classes, but American democracy, which has been a great success and sort of the model for democracies in history, also contains sociological factors that can lead to its self-undermining. Similar to what the United States has, quote, achieved, unquote, in the Pax Americana since 1945. Sure, America serves its own interests, and the Pax Americana has served American interests, but it's also a normative system. It truly is. And it has sought to create a trade system where Japan can rise up and China can rise up, and they can have competitive economies, democracies, and states. All of these are triumphs of the American system, which have led to the decline of the American imperium. It is intrinsic to the objectives of the Pax Americana, just as the seeds of threat to democracy are intrinsic to the triumph of American democracy. Thus, here in Asia, if Trump is elected, Japan will not be able to count on American support, nor will any of the other littoral states with regard to China. However hostile Trump may become to China, it will be a transactional thing, and foreign leaders are not stupid, and the model to follow in dealing with Donald Trump is that engaged in by Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Salman. And how did, and I'm not being really facetious, shocking as this will sound, and reductionist as it will sound, how did Saudi Arabia win the favor and good relations with Donald Trump? They did two things. When he went to visit, they projected, this is literally true, Donald Trump's portrait on the wall of an entire office building as the motorcade slowly went by. And then they gave his son-in-law $2 billion. That's it. That's all it, literally, that's all it took. So Japan will be on its own. What should Japan do? It should, 1941 and 1945 is a lifetime ago. The world is not what it was 15 years ago. And Japan should, I think, do what it has been doing for the last 15 years, at least, but even more so, which is to increase its defense budget from 1% to 2%, to act in its own national interests, which means holding as close as possible to the United States while pursuing Japan's national interests, which is it has a choice. Do I want to make money and lose my sovereignty in a pax sinica, or do I want to have more sovereignty and a chance for more independence at the risk of a clash with a superpower? I would choose the latter, but that's fraught because war is a terrible thing and China's really big. But I would do that, and I think it implies that Japan should seek to do what it's really been doing. Japan has not received the credit it deserves for aggressively seeking to counterbalance the Belt and Road Initiative financially in Africa. Japan has offered something like $125 billion in aid and loans. The theoretical investments of China are several times larger, but other than the United States, Other than the United States, Japan is the only plausible counterbalance to China's rise and to a pax sinica in the Western Pacific and Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific. And I'll be done in just a moment. That implies also what Japan is starting to do, which is ever closer relations economically, politically, strategically, militarily with India in particular, and with the replacement, I can't remember the long acronym of what was going to be the Trans-Pacific Partnership. One of the great disasters of American policy was literally the first day of Trump's presidency when he withdrew the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would have counterbalanced China's inevitable economic rise and increasing influence. And Japan, under Shinzo Abe, attempted to replace that. Can't do that without the United States adequately, but did what is possible. And so I think we're in at best, a multipolar, more likely a confused, almost state of nature world. China's rise is not going to decline, however foolish the recent economic decisions and political ones are of Xi Jinping. And the U.S. will no longer, Japan will no longer be able to count on the U.S. if Donald Trump is elected.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Very insightful. Okay, we'll go to questions and answers. If you have a question, please raise your hand, come up to the microphone, state your name and affiliation if you have one. Okay, starting man at the back.
Hi, I'm Alistair Gale with the Wall Street Journal. Thanks very much for your presentation. Fascinating stuff. I'm curious about your take on the Steele dossier and what impact you think that might have had on thinking about Trump's connection to Russia, whether actually that was sort of beneficial for him because he's able to say, well, it's all basically lies.
Yeah. Yeah, the Steele dossier I was aware of before it became public, because I was at that point jumping up and down in concern and ferreting around, and some people routed news of it to me. And when I read it, I never met Steele myself, have not, although we were roughly serving in our respective services at the same time, I'd say. And colleagues and friends of mine did work with him, but I have no personal connection to him. So when I saw the Steele dossier, my take was this is a series of raw intelligence reports, and that Steele has done a very good job of conveying what his various sources and subsources said. As I recall reading it, he never said, this is corroborated, substantiated, verified fact or intelligence. These are raw intelligence reports, which then one should always take with hesitation or provisionally and verify. Intelligence is no good unless it is substantiated, which has been lost in this whole dispute. So that's how I thought Steele had done a solid job of collecting rumor and report. End of story. And yes, I agree that in the end, this has served Donald Trump because he's learned what Orwell taught better than almost anyone, it seems. All you need to do to establish truth, in quotes, is repeat it endlessly. That's it. Facts are irrelevant. The truth is subordinate to perception. And so he said, it's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie. And instantaneously, in any event, 35% of the population of the United States will accept that. And the other 2/3 who spend most of their time taking their children to football practice or working as dentists or pipe fitters and will spend 25 seconds a day focused on political issues, will be inclined. This is how I always describe the dilemma for an intelligence service or a political figure. I always take the stereotypical, apocryphal dentist in Peoria, Illinois, the heartland of America. He's an educated person. He's a devoted citizen. He wants to do right. He wants to understand what is the right way to interpret facts. But what is his life like? He works hard, and then at the end of the day, he will take his children to whatever activities they have, and then he will go home and spend. And this is a statistically verified statistic. He will say, "Gee, I need to spend time with my spouse." Or in this instance, wife, and on average, people spend 7 minutes per day of quality time with their spouse. Because then you have to eat, and you have to take out the trash, and so on. And then you think, oh my God, what's going on in the world? I want to be a good citizen. And no one anymore opens papers, but he'll read the paper or look at the news. And I think, what am I supposed to think about the Nagorno-Karabakh dispute between Azerbaijan and Armenia? And you go, holy shit, I don't know anything. Well, I know that the regulations on my business are really onerous, and the taxes are a pain, and I have to do this and that. So I like small government because that will make it easier for me to live. That's what the Republicans say, or you can make the alternative argument. And if the Republicans say that, well, it's their job to know what's going on here, and the Republicans say the Steele dossier is a lot of malarkey. So, end. That's it.
So, he's able to say any, insinuation that he's being controlled or Russia has any influence over him is essentially false because people are only paying attention to what he's using the Steele dossier as a way to say, well, it's all garbage, right?
Right.
When it comes from,
and it's all about, and something I didn't say at all, but very important. One of the keys to an intelligence operation is proving in a court of law illegal behavior and treasonous behavior is exceptionally difficult to do, and any intelligence operation is designed to be deniable. You want something to be as open as possible because then it's not alarming. And it's unchallengeable, it's unpursuable. Most espionage cases in the United States are not brought to trial. There was one that was almost 40 years ago now, famous when I was working. Colleagues of mine were involved in it. The number 2 diplomat in the American embassy in Austria had been caught in a honey trap and then turned by the KGB, and we had him to rights. But he was never prosecuted because the standards for counterintelligence assessment almost never can meet the standards required in a court of law. And so he was fired and denied his pension. And the last I heard, which was decades ago, he was reduced, the senior diplomat, to bagging groceries in the South, someplace in the United States. But that's the most punishment that realistically could be achieved for him. So similarly with Donald Trump and the Russians, you do things openly, and you can just deny it. And then Trump is a master. And it's not being facetious. If you just say, well, that's not true. No, that's not true. I deny it. No. Then everything becomes a he said, she said issue. And in the press, unfortunately, not maliciously, contributes to this phenomenon. Well, we have to present a balanced characterization of any given issue, which implicitly to the dentist in Peoria creates an equivalency between the truth and the denials.
Okay, can I just jump in there and ask about intelligence interference in the media? And as you know, you say that journalists are balanced, and of course everyone here is very balanced, but a lot of media organizations aren't very balanced. So are intelligence services on both sides of the divide trying to control media and interfere with the media?
Well, that's the easiest question to answer that I've ever had. Absolutely that happens. Absolutely. The traditional way that you plant information, the KGB, orders and orders of magnitude more than the United States. And people will smile cynically and say, well, of course I have to say that. But it is true. The traditional way, when I was working, pre-internet and pre-artificial intelligence, is, let's say I want to say something about, I want to discredit assertions that Donald Trump has been approached by Russian intelligence. So I might recruit a journalist in Burundi, where I worked, one of the 5 poorest countries in the world. Who cares about Burundi with regard to Donald Trump and the Russians? Well, no one does. But a journalist there in some obscure journal will write an article saying, indications are that the Steele report, the Steele dossier, is a fabrication of the Hillary Clinton's campaign. Who cares? 200 people in Burundi have read this. But the week after that, a journalist in Ankara will say, there's an interesting report that the Steele dossier is a fabrication. And then the AP, or one of you, will say, will see these things and will write, and more often than not, it will be someone who is induced to do so by an intelligence service, but not necessarily. Will say, there are now multiple news reports indicating that the Steele dossier is fallacious. Boom, it's done. It's unstoppable. And that's the classic way. Today, oh my God, any one of you and I, even being clods with regard to computer technology and cyber stuff, can use an artificial intelligence program to generate instantaneously 1 million unique voices, people who take the perspective of a Southern gun rights advocate from Georgia with no education, or a Harvard graduate from Cambridge, Massachusetts, or an effete intellectual in some cafe society in Paris or Stuttgart, and do it 1 million times, all to make, if not, probably not the same point, many contradictory points, but all orchestrated to move in a perception in a certain direction. And it's unstoppable. So you don't need the Burundi chain anymore. And already, my understanding is that of the 9 coups that have occurred in the past year in Africa, I think the Russians have their hand in 8 of them, or something like that. That I don't know that, so I shouldn't be held to that. But I believe that 4 of them there are signs that artificial intelligence was used aggressively in the various events that occurred leading to the coups. So it is a terrifying world that we live in from that perspective now.
And now everyone here is going to write that a former CIA operative said that the Russians were involved in 8 coups in Africa recently. Asia Times.
Hi, my name is Peter Morris. I'm a lawyer, and I also write for Asia Times. Let's see. So I focus on Myanmar, and so I really care about Southeast Asia. And over the years, the U.S. government through the CIA has done some bad things in Southeast Asia, and I'm just wondering, does the U.S. government, through the CIA, have a kind of policy on not harming like local Southeast Asians, but let's say U.S. citizens overseas? And then related to that, how about like back in the States? So I've read a lot about how over the years FBI has done some bad things to, let's say, black activists or something like that. So
Absolutely.
What is the policy of FBI cooperating with CIA on domestic types of operations?
Multiple issues there. Let's see if I can remember them. So, pardon me, with regard to covert action, let's say these influence operations, the U.S. Has engaged in them. But the law is, and it's hard for anyone to believe it when a CIA officer saying the following, I know, but it is the truth. The CIA, the FBI, the U.S. government agencies are profoundly law-abiding institutions. Now, the orders may come, do the following, and the Department of Justice says this is legal, which would be hugely controversial and arguably illegal. I came to whatever public attention I have had derives from my involvement in the enhanced interrogation program. You mentioned this just before we came out. And my opposition to it, and I wrote a book about that and so on. The defenders of that program say we never broke the law, and we had clear guidance from the Department of Justice that what we did is legal. And many of them are sincere in saying that. I think they're flat wrong, but that's another issue. My point is that the agency and the FBI will always obey the law. The law on covert action with regard to affecting Americans overseas or domestically is that if any step affects the public space on an issue, it is illegal. So if I wanted to say the Steele dossier is true or the Steele dossier is false, and I decide to, as an intelligence officer, plant a story in Stuttgart, if it never reaches the United States, then it is conceivably legal to try to do that. But if the AP then picks that report up and it is put into the New York Times or the Des Moines Herald or whatever media, then Americans can read it and it is illegal. So it's incredibly fraught for U.S. intelligence to do any sort of covert influence operation because almost inevitably now things will affect American society, and that's illegal. And it's the truth, and that no office will dare to break the law because we will go to jail. Spies will not, but we will. The second thing is, what was the point? Your questions. You asked them the covert influence. Yes. I'm sorry. So I have been involved in. I'll fudge the facts a bit, but the law, FBI, CIA operation. By law, the FBI has the lead on counterintelligence operations. Anything that now overseas, the CIA has the lead. Let's say there's a report that some American is being targeted by the Russians, because I've talked about the Russians a lot. The CIA will conduct that investigation, I'll say, outside of the United States. But if it involves an American, and if it comes physically into the territorial United States, then the FBI by law has the lead, and the CIA and the FBI will work together, but the FBI will make the ultimate decisions. Now, let's say we wanted to listen to someone's conversation who is an American citizen. You have to have a warrant. You cannot do it. You may not do it, and it won't happen unless there is a warrant. There's a special court for that. It's called the FISA Court, Foreign Intelligence Service Act Court, I guess, which authorizes every single instance, and these are not blanket authorizations, Yes, you may. Here, Mr. and Miss Judge, here's our case. We believe we have probable cause that John Doe is being targeted by or working with a hostile intelligence service, and we would like to listen to his phone call. And the judge says, okay, you've convinced me there's legitimate possibility. You may do this. You have the warrant. Or no. Most of those are approved, but that's not because it's a kangaroo court. It's because the FBI won't approach the court unless it actually thinks it has a strong case. Then what happens? And I have experienced this. This is how it works. I'm listening to Abdul or Fritz talk with John Doe or with Glenn Carle. As Fritz is talking, I may listen. When Glenn Carle, the American, starts to talk, I must literally, in real time, stop listening. And then you think, well, how do you know when Fritz starts to talk again? And you think, well, let's see, most people they'll speak in 4-second bursts or 12-second bursts. So I have to wait maybe 10 seconds and let's turn it back on and I can hear, okay, Fritz is now talking and I can carry on listening. It's that carefully controlled so as not to become a police state and infringe on people's rights.
Well, I mean, in overseas, I wasn't talking about like influence operations. I'm thinking like, let's say, for example, during the Indochina War period, U.S. government policy, we bombed a lot of innocent people during that period, and let's say U.S. government has one policy for U.S. soldiers to do this, but the CIA says, oh, well, we don't like that, so we're just going to bomb these U.S. soldiers. I mean, is there a policy about that?
No, that wouldn't. That's a little even more cynical, I think. Roger Stone, or who's the director, whatever his name is.
Yeah,
Oliver Stone. Thank you. No, we all know the U.S., we're talking about the CIA here primarily, has engaged in covert actions. The most famous one, the all-star list is 1953 in Iran and 1954 in Guatemala. The man who did the 1954 Guatemala operation was the man who got me into the CIA, by the way. He's a very nice guy. But the golden era of that kind of covert action there were two, in the 1950s under Eisenhower and then the first administration of Ronald Reagan. And with the Sandinistas and the Contras, we also engaged in covert action. And there was law breaking there. Clearly there was, and colleagues of mine went to jail for it, and they should have. But covert action is so fraught that certainly in the CIA, there's a realization that it tends to have worse unintended consequences than it can have successes or gains. Yeah. And it is not, I don't know, I'm not privy to what the agency is doing today or 5 years ago, but there's much less covert action in the 21st century than there was in 1980 to 84 or 1952 to 60.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Rocky Swift with Reuters. I've got kind of two questions. One, Nikkei Asia wrote a story a couple days ago citing a Singapore-based think tank that's saying that for the first time, over half of Southeast Asians would now prefer to align with China over the U.S. So first of all, do you think that holds water? And second, why? And second, my second question is just very different, but lately there's been new reporting about the so-called Havana syndrome that kind of leads some credibility to it being a Russian action. And I think the official line from the U.S. intelligence agencies up till now has been that they don't see, they're not pointing a finger. So those two questions. Thanks. Yeah,
I'll take the second one first. I know some of the officers who have been affected by the Havana syndrome, we'll call it. I read perhaps not the most recent assessments but I read the official assessments by the intelligence community and so on about it. And my reading of it was that they were very careful to say, "We do not know," which was interpreted, sort of thumbnail summary, synopsis was, well, there's no evidence that the Russians did it, ergo, the Russians are off the hook. And that's not what the assessment said. The assessment says, we do not know. Similarly, and equally tragically, or even worse, was the assessment about Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, which was taken to say, well, look, the Iraqis are doing this. That's how the Bush administration characterized what Saddam Hussein was up to. The intelligence assessment at that time, written by the man who hired me on the National Intelligence Council, 47 times in the 12-page report said, we do not know whether Saddam is doing this, that, or the other thing. 47 times. The conclusion was, we do not know, not the absence of proof of non-action is proof of action, which was what the justification was. Similarly with the Havana Syndrome assessment, sincerity of belief is not proof of fact, but I know a couple of, at least one of the officers pretty well who was affected, and he is a rational, not conspiracy-minded, not self-pitying person at all, and he has suffered career-ending harm. So my inclination has always been, well, the obvious suspect is Russia, and the recent reports seem to lend credence to that. Yeah, I forget the first part of your question.
About changing attitudes in ASEAN.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think that's an easy one. I think China can make a very strong case, and they do, and the fact and the propaganda fit. The best operations are those based on truth. You can say, look, what is America? It's a bunch of white guys from the wrong side of the Pacific, and what are they doing mucking around here? And we are the inheritors of the British and European colonial tradition. We are the new for 75 years we've been the new supposed neo-colonists. And China says we never invade anybody. Not really true, but that's the accepted perspective. And we are offering you guys wealth. You cut a deal with, do business with us, and we can all get rich and be happy. And what do most people want to do? They want to, after, I don't know if the dentist in Myanmar goes to football practice now, but they're the same that way as any other average citizen anywhere else, and they see the prospect of trade without war, and therefore increasing, personal material success without war, and non-interference in domestic affairs, which ignores what intelligence services do, and political pressure for economic and social and strategic reasons. And what do I care about the South China Sea? And so I find the appeal very, very strong. And one reflexively would think, well, strong countries will have influence. China's here, America's there, so why is America mucking around?
Guy at the back. Oh, Jen Ken.
Thank you. Very interesting. John Alcar, professional investor. That's what I do for a living, not a magazine. Why do you think there's such a strong support from the religious right in America for Trump? And what does this say about America to you? Thank you.
Yeah, I have... I have had, what's the proper tense? I had, for decades, for most of my life, dear friends, multiple dear friends who are evangelical. I am anything but. And the appeal is that the Supreme Court banned abortion, and there's a strong racial thread to the evangelical movement. It is not an identical set, but it overlaps with the aggrieved, less educated working class or rural white, who is most angry and most affected by the loss of influence of the traditional American way, which is that people who look like me run everything. It's, I think, critically important to realize that when I was born, these are I've written about this, so I looked up the statistics. When I was born in 1956, America was 89% white. And in 2045, America will be 49% white. And starting in 1965 with the Civil Rights Act and the Immigration Reform Act, America has revolutionized itself. The America I grew up in is unrecognizable, or the America today is unrecognizable from the America I grew up in. Everyone here, particularly the Americans, who maybe no one's as old as I am, but are probably old enough to remember that the world we lived in, the only minorities we saw were in subservient positions on film, television, the media, and that was life. And women knew their place because they didn't have a choice, and that world is gone, happily so. And finally, for the first time in its history, America is has materially moved to embrace its ideals for everyone. But I challenge anyone to identify any individual, perhaps individuals, or any group in history that has ever willingly ceded dominance. I don't think there's one case. I don't think there's one. And so people who look like me, but didn't come from Brookline, Massachusetts, and go to Harvard, are angry and frightened. And that's an overlapping set with the evangelical crowd. And Donald Trump truly does channel, embody, represent, and share the views that, this is all wrong, and, there is a rightful way that America should be, and it's not the way America is coming to look. I think that's the appeal.
Officially, we're out of time. Do you have a few more minutes, Glenn?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nishimura Freelance. I'm not sure it's appropriate for me to ask about this, but we had an earthquake hit in Taiwan, and the Chinese government offered assistance to the recovery or reconstruction of Taiwan. So, what do you think is the response of the United States, including the intelligence community?
To that offer? Well, I would guess, if I were still serving, I think I would suggest, and I expect the American response is, what a humanitarian gesture, and China is being a good citizen. But we have nothing to say about what Taiwan does or China agrees between themselves. I'd be surprised if that were not the formal response. It's an astute thing for China to do. It puts actually the Taiwanese government a little bit on the back foot because it's churlish to deny help of part of China, as China is part of China, even according to Taiwan. Would the intelligence service have a view? I think they just think, well, that was an astute diplomatic move by China.
Gentleman in the front here.
Hi, Glenn. Thank you very much. This was fantastic. My name is Edward Mears. I'm an attorney here in Tokyo. Following up on Taiwan, I'm curious what your thoughts are on a U.S. Position towards Taiwan under a Trump presidency. He's said some conflicting things, in my view at least, that he's very much against China, but seems to be willing to let Taiwan go. And if that does come to pass, if a Trump would just let Taiwan go, what do you think that would mean for Japan's relationship with the United States?
Yeah, well, I don't know if possibly Donald Trump can find Taiwan on a map now. although I'm not certain. But he doesn't care about Taiwan, and he doesn't care about China. He certainly doesn't think that it would be worth Americans getting in a war over some island with Asians on it. But he also could react, at least rhetorically violently, if he were criticized or challenged by Beijing. Thus the contradictory nature of almost everything he does and says. It's all about how he thinks he looks, and can he cut a deal? I mean, that's the framework, I think, in which he sees the world and issues. I think he'd take a similar approach to an issue like an invasion of Taiwan or a crisis over Taiwan that he took to the COVID pandemic, which is, gee, this makes me look bad, so there is no pandemic. And when it continued, he said, well, you're just exaggerating. You're political partisans. And a mask is a stupid thing because it's just out to make me look bad. It's not insane, but it's grotesque. But that's how he approaches all issues. And so I think that's how he'd approach Taiwan. And the implications for Japan, I think, I've thought for years, independent of the Trump phenomenon, that nations pursue their own interests, and Japan is foolish if it doesn't do so also. And to the extent that they can have the means of implementing policies that the Japanese decide is in Japan's national interest, Japan should pursue those. Then that means a ever stronger national defense. And you could make the argument that means that we reach an accommodation with Beijing. I mean, that's a subjective decision with many, many factors involved. But that would be a Japanese decision, and Japan would have agency to attempt to implement it rather than being helpless to the forces beyond. So it's not unique at all what I say about Japan, just that Japan's in a historically strange position of having been the creature of post-war American imperium.
Yeah, go ahead.
Tim Horniak, freelance. Sorry if you've already been asked this question because I came late, but I was wondering if you could tell us answer to a silly pop culture question. What are the most realistic spy movies or novels that you've seen or watched over the years, or are they all just silly fluff, or are there some that are actually kind of realistic in your experience?
I do get asked that a lot, and I think it's a fair question because the only perception almost any average person has of intelligence is the Hollywood movies or movies in general or books. Almost all of the spy movies are stupid. Almost all. There's one about my former office mate that is actually quite good. Valerie Plame, you might know the name. Valerie had her career destroyed by the neoconservatives during the Bush administration because her husband, who was my first boss, wrote an article in the New York Times in 2003 entitled, "What I Did Not Find in Niger." He had been ambassador to Niger, and the Bush administration in part justified the invasion of Iraq by saying Saddam Hussein is developing nuclear weapons, and look, they're buying yellow cake uranium from Niger, which is one of the few sources for it. Well, that's pretty alarming if that's true. So the CIA was asked by the Bush administration, is this true? Give us proof. Actually, what the Bush administration asked was, give us proof rather than what's the situation. And I know that firsthand. And so the CIA had used all source investigation. You don't just act every conceivable thing. We look at newspapers, look at satellites, look at human sources, et cetera, et cetera. Among this effort to learn what was happening, if anything, they said, well, hey, Joe Wilson was ambassador to Niger. He is now retired, but he has contacts there from his years serving as an Africa hand. Ambassador Wilson, could you go and talk to your contacts in Niger and see what you hear? And he said, of course. Joe Wilson was Valerie Plame's husband. Valerie Plame was my office mate. Literally, I sat as far away as, we sat that far away from each other. And at the time, no, it was before them, no matter. So Ambassador Wilson went to Niger, and he came back and he said, all my contacts say this is just complete lunacy. There's nothing to this whatsoever, and here's why. Now, is he correct? Maybe not. But that's what his report was, like a Steele dossier, frankly, except that his report is substantiated subsequently. And so he wrote, then he sees, oh my God, we invaded Iraq. And so he wrote, this is what I did not find in Niger. And he told the facts. This didn't look good for the Bush administration, so they decided to, if you don't like the message, what do? You kill the messenger. And so they thought, oh, well, look at this. We can characterize this as a junket because he happens to be married to a CIA officer, and we can discredit him and the report by saying that this was a bit of nepotism and a junket. And so they leaked that his Ambassador Wilson's wife was a CIA officer, whom they then characterized as a glorified secretary and a hot babe who should not therefore be taken seriously. And it's true that Valerie is a very attractive woman. It's also true she's a real competent intelligence officer who is quite tough, and I can tell you that because I worked with her 6 feet away from her for 2 years, and she's a great person. And her career, she was then outed because she was undercover. It is illegal to out someone. No one was ever punished. And that's how they tried to undermine the report. And I've gone off in such a tangent of personal recollection, I have forgotten why I was talking about that.
What movie?
What movies? The movie was made by, thank you, a movie was made about Valerie Plame's and Joe Wilson's story. And the title slips my mind now, but I know them both really well. Fair Game, thank you, Fair Game. I knew Ambassador Wilson and I knew Valerie respectively before they knew each other. I worked with both of them for years, and I know the business, and I know the work that Valerie was doing, and that movie is quite accurate. They get one thing wrong. There's the counterterrorism center where Valerie worked is a large bullpen. It's like what I am told is what press rooms at least used to look like, this open thing. And there are a bunch of desks, and you all have dividers. Well, we had dividers too. The thing that the movie got wrong is that the dividers in real life were about 1.8 meters high, and in the movie they were only about 1.3. And I'm convinced that's so that you can have visuals, because otherwise you'd just be looking in the movie, you just at walls of felt. That's the only thing that movie got wrong.
Okay, finally, I'd like to just get some quick-fire answers on topics. Maybe you don't have any opinion on them, but if Trump comes, I've got 4 topics, like one-sentence answers. Kim Jong-un, North Korea, what do you think?
His missile launches and so on are 2 things. One, a way to affirm his rule and protect it, but 2 are almost invariably in response to actions by South Korea, Japan, or the United States he doesn't like. And so I find in my view, are less alarming than about the imminence or likelihood of a war than they are perceived as being.
Okay. The Middle East, Israel, Gaza, what would Trump do in that case?
Well, he's in bed with the right wing of the Israeli political class, so he would, I think, back Netanyahu probably, except that it would create progressively problems for the U.S., and he's getting a little nervous that way. But it's unfortunate that the U.S. does not put substance behind its criticisms of current Israeli war policy.
Ukraine.
It's a historic disaster that the U.S. is delaying and possibly will stop aiding Ukraine. We seem to have had a policy of winning slowly, rather so as not to have a clash between NATO and Russia, which without aid, you can't even do that. And it would be historically bad. It would were Ukraine to, or were Putin to triumph even halfway. It would be a serious blow to NATO. It would guarantee a sphere of influence, international system. It would almost put paid to the normative dreams of post-1945 U.S.
And finally, related to that, what you just said, NATO. How do you think Trump would change things with NATO?
Oh, I think he's been, if not directly responding to guidance from Moscow, he's been shaped by his isolationism and Russian whispering in his ear over the years, over the decades, and I think he'll destroy NATO by ignoring it or leading it.
Perfect answers. Thank you very much. Okay, I want to thank Glenn Carle for coming today with very, very interesting perspectives, and hope he'll come back again in the future. Thank you very much.
Anytime. Thank you.
We're finished.